right. We are live for this episode of the Key to Games podcast, where we discuss game design topics here on Game Wisdom. I'm, of course, Josh Beiser, and joining me, my co-host, who's currently working on the game Samurai Pig, Joshua Reyes.
Hey, nice to be here. I am pumped for this subject. I actually got a little bit of Elden Ring time in, and last night I was actually working on combat in my own game, so I'm ready to go. Let's do this.
All right. And hopefully the internet will be somewhat stable. Of course, I'm recording things, and we'll see how things go. But yeah, combat in games is one of my favorite topics. A lot of people, I think, have found me because of my plays of like Darkest Dungeon and roguelikes and roguelites, but I am definitely an action gamer at heart. I've played way too many Ninja Gaiden, Bayonetta, The Devil May Cry, even going as far back as 2D action games. And at some point, there will be a game design deep dive action game. We're going through all the more popular genres first.
Yeah.
Who knows, maybe there'll be a deep dive on Souls-likes at some point in the future.
I think that'll be great. I'd be really amped for that one. That'd be one of my favorites. Do that one.
But action game, or specifically as we're talking about combat systems, is a very interesting topic. It's one that kind of leads back into what we were talking about in terms of difficulty design last week. And we'll probably be spending more on push forward combat and other forms of combat in later episodes. And for anyone watching this live recorded, if you have suggestions for a specific element of combat you'd like us to cover for a future piece, please let us know. But this is certainly one that we can certainly talk about start talking about any number of directions. So I guess for you, since you are designing a combat system yourself, where do you want to start our conversation?
Well, actually, before that, I actually know that both of us have been playing Elden Ring, and I know that is like a complete masterclass in combat, right? Like they have taken that, they have that code base, and they've basically taken that over from Demon Souls straight to now, and they're just basically chiseling at it and perfecting at it. And so I actually wanted to know what you took away from Elden Ring, if you felt like it was an evolution or de-evolution in combat, or what you felt. Did it bring anything new to the table? Kind of interested in your take from Elden Ring's combat.
Yeah. Well, for people watching, right now I am still very much in the first quarter of the game, so I have certainly not seen everything that it has to offer. I did beat Margit, the giant wall, for a lot of people.
Wow.
It's definitely evolved. Like, it feels like they may have pushed some strategies down, but they've given you more in the process. Like, I found parrying to be a lot harder in it. It feels like they've slowed down a lot of animation, so it's not like the enemy swings at the same kind of swing or the same kind of heft with each one. But you now have the guard counter, which I think is very interesting. It feels like they've been doing a lot of concessions towards heavy players or people who use like heavier weapons, where you can't just immediately parry, or you don't have that quicker response time. So you can now really just tank a hit and then follow up with a counter on your own. What do you think about jumping? Because the Souls-likes have never really been jumping or agility based.
Yeah, I think that was I caught you on stream, and I saw that. I didn't even know that jumping, because I've kept away from everything on the game, and I saw you jumping when I jumped, and that's what I asked you. I said, "What do you think about that?" And you were like, And so I had to play it and figure it, and I think it's good. It feels a little limited in the way, you can't grapple or anything like that. But I think if it did, it would offer maybe too much, and like it would probably cause errors in like some of the design edge cases and stuff. But they're masters at it. But I kind of dig the jump. I actually went back to my game and I started messing around with my jump a little bit to see if there was something, how I felt about my jump from it. But yeah.
Yeah, and the new jump attack that you can do is incredibly
you can jump attack.
It's overpowered, I think, in a lot of cases, because again, it basically acts as a poise breaker, and you can really wreck things. And they're definitely adding. I think there's so many more options in Elden Ring compared to other Souls likes, and even compared to other combat or action focused games as well.
And
And
it feels like it feels even more accessible, I believe, in a way. I don't know if you would agree with that, but like some part, like it's feel like you were saying, they tamped down some things, so some aspects of the game felt easier.
mhm.
Or to me, I don't know if you were getting that feeling from it too. But the Breath of the Wild Souls like vibe, I'm not sure if I was how I was feeling on that.
Yeah. And again, like they've gotten really good in terms of having different weapons feel different. And that was something that I think really elevated Demon Souls when it first came
Big
out. That
time. Mhm.
suddenly you can stab someone with a spear the same way that you swing an axe or you
Mhm.
use a bow. And
Right. So like each weapon having a move set and its own
mhm,
animation set is really what's would actually help differentiate, and really what I like about it, because it can really switch up how you approach combat, and you can create your own style just from, okay, I'm going to use this giant berserker axe, or I'm going to use a spear and a shield, right?
mhm,
And then a little bit of magic, and you can totally craft your playstyle around that. So
yeah.
I do love that aspect of that for sure.
Yeah, with the second character I started last time, I'm using the flail now. And it's just like fun that you're just standing there like winding up the flail, waiting to smack the guy who's like running at you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm on my second character now. I saw you playing, and once I saw you streaming it, because we were talking about, you were saying, oh, you're going to put it off for a little bit.
Hmm.
I saw you streaming, and I said, well, I can't put it off. So I went ahead and got it that night, and I put about an hour into it, and I was really digging it. I'm
Hmm.
still here. I made it.
Yeah, and it's definitely going to be a game we're going to be probably talking more about in the coming weeks. And I think it's going to be one of those games a lot of people are going to be
Big
remembering.
time. Big
And
time.
it's kind of like a very interesting comparison between Elden Ring and Shadow Warrior 3. That I finished Shadow Warrior 3 literally like 2 days before I picked up Elden Ring, which is good. And I really enjoyed the game, but I feel that it's going to be one of those games that's doomed to be forgotten by like maybe next three,
Immediately.
4 months, maybe
Yeah.
even less than that.
Yeah, like I mean, that's another topic, mate. Like the shelf life of games,
Oh, it
saddening,
is.
and even for like massive AAA games like that. It's not a massive AAA game, but it's a franchise. You say Shadow Warrior, people, oh yes, but are they really going to go out there and buy the game?
Hmm.
And are they really going to go and stream it? And probably not. And then with the release of Elden Ring kind of crushing it, it's going to kind of even more tamper it down, even though it's not the same markets. But yeah.
Hmm. And hello, Alexander. Yeah, we can certainly add tactical combat. I just did a cast with Craig Stern, I believe his name, who's working on was it Telepath Tactics? I think that went up 2 weeks ago, where we talk about things there. But we can certainly add to the list for these shows too. Yeah, and that I think has been one of the more, and again, like as you said, like we can certainly talk about shelf life. That's another very big topic for a future
Big topic,
show.
man. Mhm.
But with combat, it is one of those things that we've seen, I think, a huge, I think, evolution of it. I would say maybe in the last, would you say maybe 10, maybe 15 years? Like, it feels like
Definitely.
with the arrival of, like, full 3D, like when we get to the
Yeah.
PlayStation 3, Xbox era, and
Mhm.
arguably GameCube as well, that developers have really, I think, evolved what you can do in this space.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, but just okay, you said the 3D for combat gives us so much more room now, right?
Hmm.
To we can allow the player to express themselves. We can do various things that we weren't allowed to do in just like a 2D plane. You can't do all the same combat. So like definitely it has been a massive rise, like from the basic like Devil May Cry, God of War type stuff, which was like button mashing, QTE. Type stuff to what we have now. It's just been a glorious, yeah, it's been amazing.
Hmm. So here's a question for you and for the chat. Can you think of a 2D action focus game that approaches the same level of fidelity as a 3D game, or even just feeling really good combat wise? Because it's something that I have trouble really like getting. Like, I know some people will mention something like Hollow Knight or Soul and Sanctuary, but I still feel like those games were still limited in
Very
terms of
limited.
that
Yeah.
feel.
Yeah, and I was always hoping for. I said, there's got to be a really good 2D Dark Souls like game that's going to come around, and you play it, and it's just missing that dimension. Might be like the missing element, right? Like you can't do
Hmm.
it, but I secretly want to do that. Like maybe later on, I would like to tackle a really good hardcore 2D, like Souls like game to see if it's possible, because I feel like it's possible. You just have to take your verbiage, because
Hmm.
we lose one plane of movement. And so from that, what could we add to the player? Because we've taken something away. So now we need to add another avenue of movement to the player,
Hmm.
some other type of verbs that might help for that, something to counteract it.
Yeah. To Caesar's comment, the question is, can you think of a 2D game that
Mhm.
has that same level of fidelity and depth to
To
combat as
combat.
a 3D game? And I did like Sukuna. That's another game I really want to go back to. It's a one part farming sim, one part 2D action hack and
Oh,
slash.
wow.
You get
Oh,
your
yeah, I'm
Harvest
looking at it real
Moon,
nice now.
and you
Yeah.
get your combat there. Yeah, and I know we brought up like the animation on a previous topic that
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
don't have as many frames of animation in 2D, so it's kind of like the enemy starts here, and then the
Right.
sword's already there.
Right. So, and last night, last night I was working on combat on my game, and I was working on animation. And so basically what I was working on is like reaction time, like how the enemy reacts to your hit. So I was
Hmm.
working on the enemy reaction. So when he gets hit, the enemy will react from the direction. If you hit him from the front, he acts like, oh, I got hit from the front. You hit him from the back,
Hmm.
he gets hit from the back, side, left, right. And so those are things that you can't express in 2D. But so that's what I was working on. And so animation and fidelity and stuff like that goes a long way to be able to sell the action, right? So
Hmm.
like in OT, the only thing I can think of would be like 2D fighter games would be probably the best expression of like a really good like combat of that level.
Hmm.
And then but they use the animation is the key to achieve that, right? And
Hmm.
so anyway, back to what I was saying, when I'm working on the animation, is we were just tuning the animation so it flows. You feel the reaction time, it feels fluid. Basically, what you've done, right? Like
Hmm.
if you hit an enemy, the enemy doesn't react to you in the proper way, you're not really sure what you're doing. So we need to confirm the action for one, and then it has to be fluid, and that really helps sell a long ways. That's what I was working on last night with it.
Yeah.
Was mainly animations.
Yeah, and like fidelity of combat is another very big point. It like you said, it really sells the combat, and that could easily segue into talk about first-person shooters and gunplay. That
Hmm.
there's a
Hmm.
huge difference between you shoot your shotgun, makes a like, little bing noise, versus
Hmm.
you shoot the shotgun like in Doom, and it just like exactly, and then the enemy
Yeah.
actually reacts to it.
Right. Right.
And
So go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and that like those kinds of elements, like they're not required for combat, but they really do add in. You as a I think a consumer certainly can tell when you have it versus when you don't.
Don't. Like so like you're talking about like a combat system that doesn't have it, like Oblivion, for example,
Hmm.
right? And it's a combat system and it works and we deal with it. Where people would rate it on a combat system, I don't know. But like when you hit an enemy, the enemy reacts really slow, late, and
Hmm.
afterwards. But it's just a part of it was fidelity, right? I mean, when
Hmm.
did the game come out? Oblivion was,
Hmm.
jeez, that was a while back. And so the fidelity wasn't there yet to get all the animation, but like right there, it didn't have fidelity in animation. And then also the first person perspective really kind of crunched it down a bit,
Hmm.
but
And I won't get to the comments in chat, but to continue that thought, like that's one of the reasons why a lot of the Western RPG designs have never really interested me, like Oblivion, Skyrim.
yeah,
That there are RPGs first, action games
X Games
second.
second. Hmm.
While something like the Dark Souls games, Diablos, ARPGs, and so on, they're action games first,
First,
RPGs second, and it
exactly.
it doesn't sound like that big of a jump, but it really is. And I mentioned again, going back to Elden Ring, we were talking about this, I think, not last night or the night before, and I was saying that this feels very much like a Western RPG design with the open world, but it has that kind of more meticulous focus on the moment-to-moment gameplay that we typically see from like JRPGs, action RPGs, stuff like that.
Right, right. But again, I mean, that studio is just like a masterclass and everything. They've been fine tuning that combat. They've been fine tuning their world design, their lore, uh, everything. So it's a masterclass if you want to look
Yeah.
into that combat.
I would also add, in terms of a 2D game, we tried the demo for the title
Odin.
Soldiers, Soul, which is always how I misspell soldiers in general, but someone actually made a game around that. That the combat in that was, it seemed like there was something there. It had some beautiful pixel art, like some of the best I've seen in a while. And I'm curious to see where they're going to go with that one. Now, to the comments. Okay, we already talked about Sakuna. And I do want to ask you, like, once we get done with the comments, I want to ask you about, like, the amount of moves or the amount of verbs that go into combat. So if I forget that, please remind me.
I actually got it right here. I got it on the list.
Yeah, so Okinawa Rush. Yeah, we tried the demo for that one. That's always been a very interesting aspect. And this is something I definitely want to get your thoughts on, it, since you're designing combat as well. That we've seen some action games kind of go the route of a fighting game. That there is like far more moves. It's far more button heavy. It's kind of like the opposite of when we look at something like a Devil May Cry or a Bayonetta, where you maybe have like one or two attack moves or one or two attack buttons and that's it.
That's it.
And I find this a very interesting kind of like, I guess, like divergence of normal combat. There is a beat 'em up game that we tried last year. It's from a fighting game developer. Like, they did a Kickstarter for it, and it's now coming out. And it's designed essentially as a beat 'em up fighting game. So it's a beat 'em up like your Streets of Rage, Fighting Rage, and so on, but it has a far more expanded button commands, very much like a Mortal Kombat or a Street Fighter.
Tekken, right?
Yeah, and my comment, or what I want to ask you about, is I feel like these games, like when it gets that button heavy, it kind of loses some of the, I guess, elegance of action.
Right, right. It's like, okay, so like a beat 'em up, basically, kind of a button masher kind of thing is kind of the feel you're going for. Is you don't really, when you're playing those type of games, you don't really want to. I can't personally, like, I can't memorize a million combos, and then if that is required in your beat 'em up, then it's kind of like you're in the middle, right? Either go full fighting game or go beat 'em up game. But I think when you're going to that realm, like you said, it loses like the essence of the game. And instead, I'm more confused and worried about, did I memorize the correct attack? Am I losing because I can't remember the combos? Instead, you start doubting yourself and not having fun because you don't remember combos. So that's just kind of how I feel about that.
And that's always like the funny thing for me. Like, as I say, I'm a huge action game fan, so you would think that that would translate into fighting games. But no, I am terrible when it comes to, like, just like what you said, I am horrible when it comes to memorizing special moves, combos. When they have, like, some of the later ones today, they have, like, combo breakers. You can hit a button to break a guard. Like, all that I cannot remember at all. But, give me a sword, or in this case, a flail in Elden Ring, and I'll beat a boss, like, it's nothing with it.
Definitely. Yeah, and when it's the over complexity, and again, like that's in all levels of games, right? And you can do a fighting game, you can make a really good fighting game with complex combos that don't require complex button inputs, right? Or long strings of combos. It is a possibility. What was that? It was a dive kick? Was it one button fighting game? I was like, how do you even make one button fighting game? It's possible. And you can do that, but it wasn't really like a fighting game, but the theory is that you can do that, Yeah,
and I know there have been, I'll get to Michelle's comment in a second there. I do know there are games that have like, or there have been fighting games that have been really pushing into like either streamlined combos or one button systems. I know
Right.
Dragon Ball Fighter Z did that. I know
Hmm.
was it Ace? No, not AC. Arc System Works. I think they're the developers. Like they're another like very premier fighting game company. They do
Yeah.
the
Arc Systems. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Guilty
Yes.
Gear games as well. So they've
Yeah.
been certainly trying to do things along those lines. And again, like there's definitely a greater topic about what does it mean to simplify these systems, and can you still keep that fidelity? Can you still keep what makes them work?
Hmm. Hmm. Right. Because like pressing buttons, like remembering that's not a game, right? I guess it's a game, but it's not the game. The game isn't about did you remember this button order? If not, you lose. That would be a really bad game to play. And so if you take that and you extrapolate that into fighting, so we go, okay, well now how can we layer down into like from in between dive kick to Tekken 7, right? How can we meet in the
Mm-hmm.
middle? And I think what you can do is you can just take moves and combos, and instead of requiring so many button inputs or so many, you know,
Mm-hmm.
you don't need so many various inputs to get it working. I think you can do it with simpler commands, and you
Mm-hmm.
can be able to do it, achieve it in that fashion. Maybe,
Yeah,
don't know.
and there's definitely a tangent here that I have to be I have to be wary of because I may just like go on this for like the next hour. But like with, I know one of the things they did, like they're selling that line between the amount of buttons you need and the relation to the move in general.
Yeah.
And with the later Mortal Kombat's, I'm talking I think started with 9, maybe 9, 10, and 11. That I know NetherRealm has been really trying to simplify input commands. That it may just be everyone uses the same left right punch and they'll do a special move or a downright
Right.
kick. And
Right.
I think that's certainly an option there. But I think one of the issues for me is that you kind of lose the affordance of how this button works. There's a reason why the Hadouken down a quarter circle forward punch is
Hmm.
so iconic
Hmm.
because it kind of that
It literally
book
like mimics it, like
exactly.
the control pattern mimics what you're doing. Like I've
Hmm.
never seen a more perfect move, right? Like you
Yeah.
know what you're doing when you're doing it. But
And I think that's also why a lot of these Souls likes work for me. That right button's your right hand, left
mhm.
button's your left hand, and again, like some of the stuff that we talk about, not just on this cast, but like on game wisdom in general, it sounds very simple when we put it to words like this, but it takes a lot of refinement and play testing to get something to that same level as an Elden Ring or a Ninja Gaiden and so on.
Exactly. Neo 2. Oh, actually that's how I saw one of your old Neo 2 video or Neo videos. That's how I found you. Uh,
Neo, yeah. And to Odin Sphere, like Vanillaware is another really interesting developer in terms of some of the games they put out. They did Odin Sphere, Muramasa, of course, Dragon's Crown. I always get Dragon's Crown, Dragon's Dogma confused. And like Odin Sphere, I would say it's a decent game in terms of its action. I love the visuals. Like again, like anything Vanillaware does, like you are in for a visual treat when you see some of their
yeah.
games.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Um, I would say it comes close. I think one of the things that Vanillaware does better than I think some of the other developers is that animation in terms of how characters move and behave. So you are given a lot more freedom. But one of the issues I see with their games, and this is something I see from a lot of like 2D action games, sometimes they get very floaty. Like you've seen some of these games where you'll swing your sword and the character like moves forward. They'll move with the sword swing or the attack. And
Hmm.
sometimes it feels like I just like lose control, or I'll just start swinging and my character just like slowly walk into the enemy and then they'll take a hit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then let's see, yeah, and like Ninja Gaiden in a way reminds me a lot of Soulcalibur in terms of how their combos were designed. That they give you a lot of I think like free form nature too, because a lot of the combos had the same basic start. And I think to me that's one of the things that I really liked about Soul Calibur. And what was some? I think Soul Calibur versus Street Fighter. That in
Yeah.
Street Fighter, the combos are very hard coded, so that if you don't press punch in the right time, or the combos punch punch kick, and you try to do punch 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 kick, your character's like immediately stops.
Right. Yeah.
But with something
Yeah.
like Soulcalibur and Ninja Gaiden, punch 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 kick or punch punch kick is its own combo. So you can kind of, there is that element of button mashing, but you're still given. It doesn't like stop the flow of combat, which I like.
Right. Like you can still allow combos and button mashing. Like you can allow both of them together, right? Like I think DMC does that really well. Like you
Hmm.
can just do square, 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 square all day, and then but if you do square, square, triangle, square, square, right, then you got the combo. But if you
Hmm.
just happen to hit square, 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 you're still doing another combo, right? So
Yeah,
that's one
and
way to do that.
and I think they unloaded some of the complexity by having the time presses. So square square, wait a half a second, square is different than square square square.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so like that's like you call that like input buffering.
Hmm.
So like you give the player more leeway in their input buffer. So and that way they can pull off more stuff instead of being so strict and saying you have to press the next button in 0.1 or nothing. Everything stops, and so
Yeah.
that's helpful.
And I'm really happy you brought up input buffering because that's become like one of the main features of Souls likes.
Yep.
Because they punish you that if you button mash in a Souls like, your character will try to do a swing when you're trying to dodge that giant axe coming down.
Yeah, man. Yeah, like so that you're committed. You're committed
Hmm.
into your moves, right? And you can't action cancel out of them. So like if we were talking about like
Hmm.
so like I think you have Bayonetta on the cover, right? So like in
Yeah.
Bayonetta, you can action cancel out. But in like so if you're starting to swing and you're like, "Oh no,
Hmm.
he's swinging at me," you can roll back out or you can change your movement. But in Dark Souls, once you've committed to the hit, you're stuck into it. So you have to think forward a little bit before you move.
Yeah. And it is very tricky. Like, dodging versus defense is another. Like, that could easily fit its own podcast, easily, especially on combat systems.
Mhm.
And going back to what you said about input buffering, this is one of the things that really threw me off when I tried to play Street Fighter V. And I'm curious what your thoughts on this as well as chat. That in Street Fighter, the combo inputs are not related to the animation itself. So what I mean is that let's say I want to do a 3-hit punch combo. So instead of waiting for the punch to end and then hit punch again, you have to essentially input buffer the whole thing. So it's punch, 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 and then he'll do that 3-hit combo versus say punch, wait for the animation to end, hit punch again. And like that kind, and as you said, like that level of timing, it just really throws me off with that because I'm so used to
That, yeah.
watching the animation and then basing the attack off of that.
Yeah, that's terrible. That's probably why I didn't play that game. But like right now, like the input buffer in my game, like I'm adjusting that. Like you're always adjusting that and like making sure that you can't have it too tight, you can't have it too loose where the player can just button mash, but you also want to have it where it makes sense for the combo to continue. So like my input buffer is just to continue like the sword attack combo, right?
Mhm.
Like he could just do, and if you miss your combo, you're still hitting, right? It's
Mhm.
not like an instant stop, but you're still going. But yeah, the input
Mhm.
input buffer. Fix in the comment.
And to Juan's comment about Neo,
Neo.
yes, Neo, that's another really interesting game. Did you play Neo, Josh?
I did. I played Neo 1 and Neo 2. Yes, I did.
Hmm.
Neo 2, a little bit less, not so much, but Neo
Yeah.
2, Neo 1.
Yeah, I finished Neo 1. I still need to go back to Neo 2. I'm waiting for a sale for the PC version so I can replay it on that. Yeah, and like Neo is one of those very interesting cases because again, it comes from the same developers as Ninja Gaiden, Dead or Alive, and so on. So they have that background when it comes to the fidelity and to the feel of combat with it. And I enjoy Neo. Like I felt like it was a really, I think of a lot of the other Souls likes that have come out, it's probably like the closest to being a number two compared
Right.
to the From Software ones.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's very solid. The combat. I mean, it's hard to find too many flaws on it. In that regard, like saying if it stands up to another Souls like, but I think it's probably the closest one for me. What kind of I didn't really like the stances, having to change the stances too much.
Mhm.
I didn't dig that. That's like too much thinking for me in like that type of game. I'd
Mhm.
rather just go out there with my sword or whatever. But the stances kind of confuse me. I don't know how that you dealt with those.
Yeah, like I try to use. I typically stayed in normal or
Just one
heavy
stance, right?
stance. Yeah, like
Yeah.
if the enemy is stunned, I go into heavy stance, and there is definitely depth to it. And the whole RPG layer, like that is the thing that I'm still waiting. I think for From Software to really experiment with having randomized drops, not just randomized chance of a guy dropping a sword, but having that ARPG layer on
Oh
top of their
wow.
combat.
Oh, wow. I was actually wondering if they were going to do that in Elden Ring. I was wondering if they would put that ARPG kind of stuff in there, randomized
Hmm.
loots or drop or something like that. I was wondering if they would do that,
Yeah, it
but
doesn't
apparently not.
seem like it. Let's see. Yeah, we talked about Sakuna of Rice and Ruin, Stranger of Paradise. That's the new. That's the Final Fantasy one that Team Ninja is working on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
Stranger of
Is it coming to
Paradise.
PC? Maybe not. At least not yet. Yeah, and
No.
like we've even seen like more developers. I think trying to experiment with combat again. I think really with From Software, they've kind of opened up the door in terms of having more combat focused games, which is again really great for people like us to experiment with.
Right, definitely. I mean, just like you, like I mean, action combat games have always been my main thing. So just
Hmm.
watching the genre evolve is been a great thing. Um,
Now, the point that I told you to remind me that I've forgotten that was about defense, right?
Verbs. Was it the verbs or
Oh,
the
the number of verbs on
was
yeah.
are you talking about rolling or dodging?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so one of the things about like now that I remember, we were talking about in terms of games like the ones that are combining fighting game systems and things like that, is the number of actions you want to give the player. And then we'll talk about defense, I think, after this. So we'll have that down the list. But the number of abilities you want to give the player, this is one of those things I think is very tricky to balance. Because the more you give the player, the more utility you offer them. But at the same time, it leads to that greater sense of complexity. And again, one of the reasons why some of the beat 'em ups have tried to combine fighting game elements to it has, I think, doesn't work for me. Again, the same reason why a lot of fighting games don't work. That you have all these different moves, and sometimes they may be related to the buttons that you're pressing, but sometimes they're not. And again, like with as you're working on Samurai Pig, what are you finding in terms of just, I guess, how much you want to let the player have in terms of options at any one time?
Well, I think so part of it is dictated by like the level, right? The level design
Hmm.
or how much where do I want the player to be able to go, right? Do I want him to be able to jump and
Hmm.
grapple? So he can Samurai Pig can grapple and he can jump, and so he has a lot of verbs, right? But
Hmm.
you don't want to over that's one of the things is I don't want to overwhelm the player with so many verbs that they can do. Basically, he can roll, he can block, he can attack, he can block and he can parry and a few other moves.
Hmm.
But I try to keep it as limited as possible because I run in this too myself. When if I have a game and the game gives me way too many verbs, and again, if I have too many verbs and I'm supposed to do this stealth thing or this what have you, and if there's too many verbs for me, I can't keep track of it all. So I think we should try and limit it down at the start or at the base. Is what I'm thinking. What is that?
And it's just some spam. I
Oh.
blocked it there. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but I guess like you have to start like you got to start at the beginning and then just give them all the verbs that you want in that level. And then if you add something on, we add the context or what have you.
Hmm. And one of the things that we've seen from, I think, more, I guess, modern action games have been trying to give the player a lot of different tools. You have different defense moves that we'll talk about next. You have different ways of attacking, special attacks, and it is very hard to get all that working. Like, one of the things about Neo that they did, not only do you have the different stances, we have the different kind of like weapon specific actions that you can tie to, do you end your combo with triangle? Do you end it with square? And then all the items as well. And this is, I think, another very interesting aspect about combat, or how things have evolved over the last 10 years, has been providing players with more utility. And this is, again, like really links to what they've done with Elden Ring now. That in Elden Ring, you not only have your normal weapons, they've really been like going back and forth with how much magic, I think, has become a option in these games. Like, if you remember with Demon Souls, magic was a very viable build. And then they kind of removed that, or they really shrunk that down in Demon Soul, or Dark Souls.
Dark Souls, yeah.
Then they tried to elevate again in Dark Souls 2, and they had to nerf it. Mm-hmm. I feel like what they're doing with Dark Souls 3 and beyond is a really, I think, good compromise. So you can dedicate Estus to magic recovery, but of course that comes at the expense of your health. But
right.
If you can just, blast everything with fireballs, you don't really have to worry about getting in close with combat in that case.
Right, and see, and that's a good way that we're talking about it with the verbs. So if we're giving the player so many verbs, then there needs to be like a give and take, right? Mm-hmm. So you're choosing your flask, for example, in Elden Ring, to use more magic at the cost of not having so much healing ability, right? So that's one of the ways that we can control all the verbs, if we're giving all too many verbs to the player at once, or ways to separate them for the player.
Mm-hmm. And you can also do this in terms of what buttons or what commands will correspond to them. So like X or square on your gamepad is your dedicated item button. So if you have any item selected, that's where that command goes. And one of the things I think is very telling about how they've switched their focus in Elden Ring versus some of the older Souls-like is how they've made A your jump button. Where previously it was you had to press down on the left trigger in order to jump, and that was awkward as hell to try and do.
I think I maybe did it like once or twice. Mm-hmm. You could barely do it. It was really hard, yeah.
And again, like, this gets into how you design your UI and your control scheme. And the fact that they made A now the dedicated jump button means that they expect you to do more jumping. And the world has certainly been changed corresponding to that. And I haven't seen it yet on the Ring, but I know there must be some kind of like hardcore platforming sections in this game. Maybe it's in a poisonous swamp somewhere. I'm sure they could just combine it all like that.
They're gonna do it swamps and platforming. Mm-hmm. How are you feeling about the horse though? Like the just, you can ride around and kite the enemies, and you feel like it kind of waters it down, like the open world combat a little bit?
It definitely gives you a lot more advantage. And I think, again, like, they designed the open world, I think that you really have to make use of that, because there are far more enemies that you're fighting in a wide open space than in any other previous Souls-likes. And that's, I think, is another really important thing, is that how the developer intends you to play these games is a very big point. Again, it's a very big point in any video game. But when we talk about action games and specifically, this is something you have to think about as a developer in terms of the number of viable builds that you give to the player. That if you make your game, magic, range, melee focus, you should be reasonably able to play the game those three ways. And it's something I think is a very tricky thing. Like, if the developer gives you, let's say, tool A, but let's say the player doesn't like it, can they play the game without needing it? Like, a classic example is the idea of parrying or reposing enemies. In some Souls-likes, it's just this extra thing that you can do that gives you an advantage. In other ones, you are required, like in Sekiro, that if you don't get the parry down, you're not beating that game at all.
Yeah, you are not. And I mean, I got to the last boss, and like the last boss is like a parry fight, and I was just like, well,
Mm-hmm.
I can't parry enough, so and I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have another option, right? There was no other than the one way, which is to parry that hit, and that was it. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, if you're not afforded a different way to tackle it, then it can be a little obtuse.
Mm-hmm. And
Good
Juan
AI.
makes a really good point.
Hmm.
And this is a really good question for you as well as to the rest of the chat. What do you think about having enemies in games that are specific counters? And what I mean by that is, let's say you have an enemy who is completely grab immune. So if you have the ability to grab enemies in this game, this guy is 100% immune to it. In the Arkham games or the Batman Arkham games, they have enemies that are designed around this. You have a shield guy, so you can't attack from the front. You have a knife guy that requires a specific way of fighting them. What do you think about that kind of design when you have those enemies that they are essentially just, hard counter enemies? Like, if you try to fight them X and they counter that, no, you are required to fight them each in a specific way.
I kind of have a the reason you see them in game design so much is because it's kind of needed, right? And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure another way to not use it, because like part of the reason, right, for the counters is you're having enemies for specific counters just to force you to be like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, you can't just come straight up on this guy. But if you have like a shield guy and then a gun guy and
Mm-hmm.
then maybe another guy, and then we're changing up, so we have three different enemies and we have to approach and counter all of them, it keeps the action way more fluid and a little more exciting. So last night when I was testing my enemies, and I was testing with just one enemy, right, and I had a
Mm-hmm.
group of three enemies, it was a lot more boring than if I changed one enemy with one type of weapon
Mm-hmm.
to another enemy. So I had two different enemies and they had counters to each other. So like one had a heavy sword and one had a spear, or one had a shield and one didn't. And doing that spiced up the game, and it made it different because
Mm-hmm.
you're not attacking both of them in the same way. So I think it definitely helps. I don't know if it's the best solution,
Mm-hmm.
but it's definitely one solution that is used
Yeah.
for that type of situations. Yeah.
Yeah, like for me, I'm not a huge fan of them just
Hmm.
because of the fact that it really does pigeonhole how you play the game. We played a Psychonauts 2 a few weeks ago, and they really went towards like elevating the combat compared to the first game. And one of the ways they did that was to design enemies around hard counters that you have to fight, one enemy a very specific way, and you got to fight another enemy another specific way using the specific psi powers. And my problem with it is that it just kind of I feel like in this circumstance it devolved the combat, because instead of going to combat being okay, I'm going to do these crazy moves, it's okay, enemy A, I have to use tool A. Enemy B, I use tool B. And it's the same solution every single time.
So it's basically like rock, paper, scissors, or
Yeah.
wiki. Yeah.
And I think it's different like in a game like Bayonetta. Like when they introduce like the gold plate enemies in that one that you can't use witch time on. I think this gets to what Juan's comment is about how good AI will make you use or learn the combat options. That
Mhm.
you do have to kind of, in action games specifically, the enemies are their own form of tutorial or onboarding. That you need to make sure that the player understands, okay, if I have to fight this guy using parrying, how does parrying work? How do I get that timing down? Because if you don't do it, and then you design a parry only boss, some players may not have the move set or they may not have that level of skill that it's just going to stomp them. And if that's the only way to win, they're just going to quit the game.
Yeah. So there definitely has to be more than more than one way to approach any situation or any boss, right? It can't
Mm-hmm.
just be, do you have the superpower item to defeat me? And if not, then I win,
Mm-hmm.
because that's not really a game. It's more like a treasure hunt, right? And
Oh, yes.
so there definitely, you need to be considering other things. So yeah, that's bad design. And I
Mm-hmm.
understand the reason. I can understand the reason the designers think, well, this is going to
Mm-hmm.
be really cool. They have to go on the treasure hunt and find the thing, but it
Mm-hmm.
probably wasn't really cool. And when we get there, and then I had to read the wiki to find out that I needed the ice cube to fight this guy. It's not really a game. So
Yeah, and we've seen games have like kind of these like puzzle bosses or puzzle scenarios, enemies where you can't hurt the enemy until you do X. This is something that was really prevalent in 3D platformers, even 2D platformers as well. And it is one of those, I think, relics of game design today. I think people expect to be able to, if I'm good at this boss, I won't wait for him to, flash red. Let me just beat him down. Let's see. Yeah, and I think that is a good point there about how the rock paper scissors design seems more of a Western design aspect, because we've seen again from a lot of Japanese films, especially again those with the action or fighting game backgrounds, that it's more about figuring out this fight. And I think that is another reason why I really gravitate towards the Souls-like games, that the bosses or the enemies themselves are very organic, that you have to learn them. It's not the boss flashing, oh, he's flashing green, so I have to use blue attacks that counter green to fight them.
that's maddening. That is maddening. Oh my god! I hope. Yeah, it's a bad design game, but yeah, like the organic where if you talk to like a people who do martial arts, so they actually do taekwondo or something like that, when they spar with the other person, they're talking about the opponent being a puzzle that they have to figure out, and that's how they'll talk about the sparring that they have to do, right? So it's the same thing. The boss itself is the puzzle, right? And how he moves and how he acts. So figuring out your opponent is the part of the battle, right? And if the boss is telling you, oh, here's my weak spot, and it's flashing, is that really figuring it out, or is it being told to you? And then you know what I mean? So.
Yeah. And that again is one of the reasons, or why the From Software games have really become elevated. Is that they have created some I think the most iconic and interesting boss fights in action games over the past decade. There is a post I wrote. This was a long time ago, where I broke down every boss in Demon's Souls and how each one taught you a different lesson and how each one tested you in a different way.
I'm gonna have to read that one, Josh.
You'll have to find it too, because I'm not sure where it went to. But yeah, and I think one of the big aspects of this evolution has been changing up the animations of bosses and enemy design as well. That it's not just the enemy does the same generic sword swing, and that's what he does every single time. And one of the nastiest things I think From Software has implemented is that you'll see now enemies will start the same combo, but they will end in maybe 2 or 3 different variations. So you can't just rely on, he'll swing left arm, right arm, and then he stops. Maybe on one variation, he'll do left arm, right arm, kick, spin, backflip. And with the Elden Ring bosses, some of these bosses, their combos will go on for 5 to 10 seconds if you're not careful.
I'm worried, man. But yeah, I think we were talking about the fidelity and the fluidity, and I think that has to do with, I'm not sure if they're using it, but one tech we have now is we have the ability to do procedural animations, right? So if you think about the character itself as just a puppet, we have the ability to kind of create animations in the game at runtime, or just they don't have to be at runtime. They can be baked also, but they're procedural, so it looks more organic. So we have the ability, we rig up the model, and then when the model is made, we animate the model with the procedural animations, right? And so that way it'll come out a lot more organic, and you're able to do a lot more stuff in that regard, like you're talking about, just stuff that will follow the rules of the animation, but that will slightly different. So you can do a lot more variations with procedural animation. So that's part of it, right? But fluid animation and combat is super key, super key.
Yeah, and being able to have the variety of attacks from the boss is a very important point again about having that combat puzzle. And I think that's why I've gravitated to a lot of action games that are more about that kind of figuring it out as you play versus the pre-planning. I need to go in this fight with, item A, B, and C, and then I can just one-shot this guy. And when you see like some of the more challenging enemies, especially in Bloodborne, when you fight like the rival hunters and humanoid fights, it really does become kind of like that dance between two characters in terms of I'm figuring them out, they're trying to figure me out.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean that's one of the most, and like we were talking about the Juan was talking about the AI. That's the AI, right? That
Mm-hmm.
you're fighting with the AI. So if you're dancing with the AI, that's a really good thing, right? But if you're clunking against the AI and fighting with
Mm-hmm.
it, oh yes, Bayonetta. Someone jumped in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually have not played the second one, so but
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've played the second one, but I would like to go back to that when they ever port that one to PC as
they
well.
port it, I'll grab it and check it out. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
And yeah, like Bayonetta is a really solid one. I still think my favorites are Devil May Cry, God Hand, and what's number three? Oh, and of course Ninja Gaiden Black.
Yeah, I think the new God of War, man, I really love that. Did you like the combat in the new God of War?
I thought it was okay. I didn't like how like RPG heavy it was in terms of the gear
It was.
rating.
It was. I was a little surprised on that, but I still felt that it had a lot of the meat and the impact and the juice from the older games, and was able to expand on it in ways that the other ones couldn't. But it was weighed down a bit by the
Yeah,
RPG trappings. It was
yeah.
very deep into it.
Yeah. But I think God of War is another really good example about fidelity in terms of the
Yes.
combat with the axe. Like they did that whole GC talk about how they got the axe throw and the return to
Hmm.
feel so right in your hands.
Yeah, and that's just iteration and iteration and iteration. And last night I was iterating over just how the AI is going to react to a hit, right, from the directions. And
Hmm.
I was iterating over that for hours and hours, and that's just the beginning. And until it feels right, like so
Hmm.
that's how you get to the feel.
Yeah. So here's a
Iteration.
question about God of War. Did you
Mhm.
beat the? How did you find the Valkyrie Queen fight? You got to it.
I beat her. I loved it.
Hmm.
It took me what you say you beat it like in 2 tries or
No, that was
something.
like 6 hours of playing to beat that
Yeah,
fight.
it took me about 8 hours. Yeah, about 8 hours of playing to get it, and it felt I wouldn't say it felt like a God of War, like a Dark Souls boss. It felt more like a relief to beat it. Like, oh, okay, it's finally
Hmm.
done. But it was definitely really fun, and I thought it was the height of all the combat designers coming together and thinking, okay, let's
Hmm.
put everything into this one thing. And so I thought it was, as a game designer, I was really kind of blown away by what they were throwing at me. I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, I
But
think that one fight, as far as like the most amount of enemy pattern or attack patterns, I think out of like any other game I've played.
hmm hmm yeah, and but the parrying in there was not a little bit easier than Sekiro parrying. So if I,
Yeah. And speaking about Sekiro, I think that's a good segue into talking about defense. Because this is the other aspect when we talk about generalized combat systems that it is very important to think about. Is what happens if the enemy attacks? What can you do about that? And I think one of the more interesting aspects, and this is again something that From Software has done, is that we typically see two distinct methods. You have, the blocking method, and then you have the dodging. And a lot of games will typically focus on one or the other. From Software typically focuses on both, that you can really play the game either way, and you're not explicitly punished or rewarded for focusing on one way or the other.
yeah, definitely. And again, that's like how we were talking about uh, giving the player the verbs and the ability to express themselves in the same way. If I want to walk around with a shield all the time,
Hmm.
before I walk into a room, let me do that. If I want to run in there with my one hand and attack the room, let me do that, right? And still be able to do both of those. But if it's like you will not be able to survive unless you're holding your shield up or only with this weapon, that's not cool. We don't want that.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the things where From Software has really eased up as we saw their evolution from Demon Souls to Dark Souls to Elden Ring. that it felt like with some of their earlier games that you kind of did have to fight these balls a specific way, or it was noticeably harder if you
Way
wanted to
harder.
go like armor being a really good example that for well, excuse me, that it felt like you were kind of punished for going the heavy block, heavy armor route in Dark Souls 1. I would say maybe up to 2 or 3, like poise being the big thing. Like in Dark Souls
Yeah.
3, like I remember poise was a stat that, it sounded like it was important, but the enemies completely disregard poise. So it was kind of like, oh, great. So they can just, attack me through my attacks while I can't do theirs. And then in Dark Souls 2, if you remember, they tried to turn your iframe on dodge into a stat. And that really
What do you
drove me
call
up a
that?
wall.
What do they call it?
I think it was adaptability was the
Oh,
stat there.
yeah, a freak iframe stat. That's wild. Yeah, it blew my mind.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure I and a lot of people just hated that idea because
Mhm.
that thing is another big thing about combat in general. You want to be really careful about having, and again, this could even be applied to other games. Again, like false choices, something that's so good you never want to ignore it, or it's so bad you never want to use it. And with something like adaptability, it was always on. Like you really need to get that because I remember, like, in the early parts of the game, I was like, why am I getting hit? I'm doing all my dodging. And then once I got up to, I think it was like, what, like 18 or 20, I forget what the cap was, or the soft cap. Oop, I'll close my door in a second. Once you get that soft cap, I was just like dancing around one of the balls, like he could not hit me because my iframe was so high.
I'm gonna have to go back and just max out my adaptability.
There we go.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, I remember when that stat. I just couldn't believe that. I was actually spent more time wondering how they programmed that stat in the deep level. I was trying to figure out how they did that. Because adjusting because that would be adjusting like an input buffer or the invulnerability time, like the iframe. So I was figuring out on the programming for me. Um,
So, speaking about defense, here's another question for you and for chat. What are your thoughts on being able to stun lock enemies? Because this is another thing that I see different action developers will tend to focus on, or they'll have different points about this. Was there are some action games where if you get that first hit in, the enemy is just done. You're going to just stomp them into the ground. Some developers will design that if you hit the enemy, let's say 3 times in a row, they will auto break. That they will immediately do, a
right.
hyper or super armor attack that you're forced to dodge. And then there are some games where you can't stun them at all. That if you start punching them, they're still just going, go line up that attack, and then it'll come down on you.
Okay, so that one's not gonna work. So that one won't fly. The last one they have to be stunned because they need to react. Right? We're talking about combat, so
Mm-hmm.
enemies need to react. Um, I think that you have finding a middle ground where they do need to be stunned and like, but you can't spam stun them. So like
Mm-hmm.
maybe you can stun, the first 2 hits, stun them like we were talking about, 1, 2,
Mm-hmm.
and then after that they're unstunnable or they'll do some type of attack back to you. I think that's probably the middle ground.
Mm-hmm.
But I think just for reactivity, if you are combat, if you didn't have an enemy that was stunnable, it would make it really hard to have multiple enemies, right? Like I can put just last night I was working on the enemies being stunned and I was working on that. So when they weren't stunned, if they weren't stunnable, it was just like this zombie pack attacking you all around and you surrounding you. And if they were stunnable, you could hit them and then they would get knocked back from the crowd, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the circle that's surrounding you, and you could knock an enemy back this way and knock an enemy back this way and make room. And so that's probably one of the most important reasons to have the stun. So
Mm-hmm. And to want to talk about Neo 2, yeah, the yokai counter system, that was a very interesting thing. What did you think of that?
I was terrible at it.
Yeah, me too.
I was terrible at it.
Just throw another layer on top of the stance
Yeah.
system.
I was I was like, I don't got the stances, and now the yokai counters. I was like, yeah, I
Hmm.
was bad at that.
That actually is another interesting point about when you introduce enemies that have unique rules to them or a unique ability that kind of goes above and beyond the rest of the game. Like in Neo 2, they introduced the bosses that had their own kind of desperation phase when they go into like I forget the exact name of it. Like they do like the yokai feel, or they go like yokai mode, and they get like really powerful. And I'm of two minds about this. Like I think it's a great way to kind of give a boss a or give an enemy a unique flavor to it. But sometimes it feels like you're kind of trying to like troll the player. That oh, you were fighting the boss like this, but now they do all this crazy stuff that you're immune, that they're now become immune to everything.
Yeah, that's like a complete troll. I mean,
Dark Realm, thank you.
other than I mean, what does that do, right? In game
Mm-hmm.
design, other than to frustrate the player,
Mm-hmm.
uh, break all contracts with the player can no longer trust you as a game designer anymore,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like so it does a lot of bad things, and really it's just the designer maybe didn't have any ideas and are trolling you, because I don't think of any reason uh, that would be a good design tenet to adhere for a boss to at all, you know?
Mm-hmm. I will say with the yokai camera Neo 2, I think the one that I gravitated towards was the attack one. And then kind of the counter. That third one where you create like a after image that the boss has to hit to do the stun. That was, beyond me. Like my brain was not making that connection.
Exactly. What's Dark Realm?
That was the thing in Neo 2, like when they go in like their super form.
Oh, yes, 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 yes. Okay, that's
Hmm.
right.
Yeah, and like going back or returning or focusing more about like defensive side about all this, that you have to give the player the means of surviving. And again, like Sekiro is a really good example, not only just of defense, but as I was talking about earlier regarding, how many routes do you give the player? And I think it's very interesting. Like, again, my dream would be to interview From Software. I would just spend like a few hours talking to them, just on
A
the
few?
Soulsborne
Oh, just
alone.
a few?
Yeah,
Wow.
part one of like 5 or 6 there.
Yeah.
And the thing that I think that's really been very subtle has been how they've tried to balance all their different abilities. Because a lot of people have argued saying Sekiro is very accessible, it's very approachable as an action game. I would argue that it's not. That the reason why I think people say it is because there's only one way to play it. But
Right.
if you don't play the game that one way, you're never going to get past it. Like Ginchiro is going to stomp you until you decide to quit the game, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it occurs to you. Yeah, and I think that's probably why it got so challenging with Neo 2 with the yokai. And again, that's a very another point that the yokai system was not an optional thing that they implemented. That was required. And I remember that they added that in between the first demo they put out and the second demo they put out for Neo 2. So the first time I played Neo 2, that wasn't in the game at all. I was like, yeah, this seems pretty good. Like, that was very easy. And then the second demo, when you get to that boss, was like the weasel or the guy with like the animal in the trees. Like, oh wait, why did he just also go super form on me? What is going on here?
Yeah, man.
Yeah, and like Sekiro, like it is, I would say, my least favorite of From Software's recent games.
It
I
is.
I ended up respecting it more than liking it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, to me, I was like, this is a monumental achievement. They were really brave in changing up
Hmm.
the combat a little bit. The avenues they decided to go to, they did play itself in some realms, but yeah, it's probably my least favorite. I think Dark Souls 2 to me is way better than Sekiro. That probably sounds bad, but it's
Hmm.
just that uh, again, when you're talking about the accessibility, because it's one way to play, right? Like you don't get ruined because you do a bad build, I guess. Was there even stats, or I don't even remember
You
now.
have the skill tree that you can unlock, and
Yeah.
as well as
Okay,
like
so you can upgrade your
yeah.
arm weapon. Okay, so you could do that, and so it did offer you a few realms, but I think it just felt really limited, that it forced you to play that way, right? Like you had to parry, and like I didn't beat the game because of that. Like I
Yeah.
couldn't finish it because my parry skills were too bad. But oh
Yeah.
well, you know.
Yeah. And I think that's again why I like these Dark Souls games, I mean Elden Ring, that you have those options. Like the wolves, like as I was saying on Twitter, like basically my whole strategy in Elden Ring is spear wolves, horse. That's pretty much like all I need. But again, for somebody like me, that's all I need. For somebody else, they may need magic, they may need summons, they may need other players. And it's important, I think, to design the game to accommodate those different strategies. Like, imagine if, again, if this is in Elden Ring, this is just me being just a complete shot in the dark. But imagine if there is a boss fight that just says, haha, you can't use summons anymore. Like, yes, that would be a very interesting fight, but you're pulling the rug out from underneath all the players who say, let's say my build is based on summons. How dare you do that after 20, 30, 40 hours, whatever.
Yeah, or I've been beating every boss with my friends, and we've been doing it together, and now there's this one that we can't do. Like, yeah, definitely. You can't change those tenets. Exactly.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, and I think that is an interesting point, Juan, as my voice is dying. Oh, but about the recent Ninja Gaiden, like Ninja Gaiden Black, and that is again like one of I think the highest quality action games I've played. But again, it is very much a one way to win, and that one way is of course getting good. And like for somebody like me, I can beat Ninja Gaiden. My one thing is I have not been in that game on Master Ninja difficulty, but I can say that I've been in that game a lot more than I think a lot of other people have. But again, that's for somebody like me. And I think one of the things that From Software has really, I think, focused on is having more ways of playing. If somebody wants to use lightning magic or summons and beat Elden Ring or Dark Souls, fine. Like, I do not care. And again, that's one of the challenges, again, about understanding your market and the audience. And that's a huge other topic in of itself.
That's another week, man.
Yeah.
Another week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Dark Souls 2 was very underrated. It really was. In the combat wise, it took a lot of stuff from DS1 and kind of, I think, polished it and made a few changes. I really liked it. It was a really good PvP game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I remember what I said when I reviewed Dark Souls 2 way back then. I said that it is the lesser of the Dark Souls games, but even a bad Dark Souls game is still like one of the best games of the year.
One of the best games it's one of the best games ever made, right? And that you should study it, and you should. So yeah, still is the best game ever.
Yeah.
Let's see here. What else did we have to talk about?
Yeah,
Okay, we were talking about like the verbs, right? That
Mhm.
players could do blocking, rolling, and dodging and stuff. Or
Mhm.
did we get past that?
We talked a little bit about that.
Yeah.
I guess if we're talking generally about combat, and again, we can certainly do parts 2, 3, and up until X in terms of some of these things.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, as again, somebody who played the Souls games, what did you think about Bloodborne in terms of like those very subtle differences to the system?
I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that if I'm probably gonna put one up there, man, I might put Bloodborne as the best to me. I think as the most polished and best Soulsborne experience. I really like the rally system, right? When we're talking about, okay, what can a player do? Well, he can parry, and he has a limited amount of parries, right? So you can't just sit there and parry because they're based on your gun, right? And then also it has push forward combat in it, right? Because it encourages you to go, not hide behind a corner and wait, because if you need health, you need to go forward and attack. If you got hit, you need to hit back, right?
Yeah.
So it encourages that. So I really love that. I love the aggressiveness, and then of course the ambiance. But the combat of it, to me, I thought was probably like the pinnacle to me of the Souls one so far.
And like
without playing Elden yet, though.
Yeah. And for people new watching, as I said this before, Bloodborne is the only Soulsborne game right now that I have platinum. I did all the achievements, I did every single thing in that game. And whew, those chalice dungeons.
So you'd rank it as in the Souls games as the number one, or?
It's up there. Again, I haven't finished Elden Ring yet, but I like the fact that the combat was faster. This is, I think, another important point. I think we need to drill in or explain to people watching. When we talk about combat systems like this, there are a lot of subtle aspects that can be the difference between a good, bad, and master class system. Thank you, Amanda. It was a challenging one. I still have to do it for the other Dark Souls games. But, like, again, even just changing the combat speed, like, I would assume that if you are new and you watch somebody play Bloodborne and somebody play Dark Souls, you may not be able to tell that one is significantly faster than the other. And it's one of those things, again, like, as I'm sure as somebody who designs combat, who's working on an action game, you really think about the important subtleties that go into combat.
There's so many knobs in turn, like so many knobs and things to turn, from the animation speed, the player speed, input buffers, the verbs that the players can do. So there's so many things that we can tweak and adjust, right, to make it feel can't tell what to make it feel meaty.
Yeah, about those details. Yeah, and. Oh, I just had thought. Oh yeah, and like even again, like the tells that you give to the enemy is a very important aspect of this, because one of the things you can have, and this is again something this is another point I want to ask you about as well as chat. What do you think about having visual tells to attacks? Because it was something that Sekiro did, and I liked the idea, but I hated the fact that it was one universal tell when there's like 3 ways to actually, count. He had like that, he stomps down the sword, jumps out of the way, and I think there may have been a third one that I can't remember.
But it was like the sign we had to, right? Yeah. It was like a symbol that you had to decipher above the head, and I was like, I don't know, because it's blue, green, red, or whatever, the same thing, but just a different color, so I couldn't decipher it. Watched both and didn't know till now about the speed differences. Yeah, you literally have to play Bloodborne and you see how much faster it is. Yeah, very visceral game.
I love like their little subtle way that you find a shield in Bloodborne and it says people have used this shield, but it has been proven completely ineffective.
Yeah, it's great, and that's another thing that they do. I won't dwell on it too much, but the little bit that I played in Elden Lore, Elden Lore, the lore was just amazing. I could it was just dripping with it. I went over to a ledge and there was a skull, and I knocked the skull over and it fell over, and I was like, "That's environmental storytelling," because there's a skull here and it fell off the ledge. Like, there's just so much stuff in that game. Anyway,
and again, we'll probably have to have a dedicated Elden Ring discussion in the future. I'm not going to spoil, but there's like one part. It's like, I found this building. It looks completely innocuous. I'm sure it's just like a little dungeon. I go in there. It's like, oh, there's just like this massive world in here. It's like, oh, well, here's 2 hours. Like, it's just like this innocuous building out there. Like, yeah, there can't be anything big in here. And yeah, like again, like level design, environmental design, that's topics. That's a week 3, week 4 kind of thing.
Right.
In terms, one thing I wanted to mention, you were saying earlier about the push forward combat. We are going to talk about push forward combat in its own episode.
Dedicated, yeah.
But that was one of the things I really like in Elden Ring, is that you now can recover Estus Flask if you kill like all the enemies 2 hours. Like, we can easily talk like 4 or 5 hours.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
That's
nothing. That's nothing.
Yeah, like again, like giving the player the means of recovering their resources is another big thing. And again, we're not going to dwell on that too much here because that really leads us into push forward combat. But We are about an hour and 15 in. I'm trying to think if there is anything else generally about combat that we didn't touch on.
Let's
Um,
see here. Well, we got into fluidity of
mhm,
animations, a lot of Elden Rings, all the verbs. I think we covered most of the general for now.
mhm. Let's see. King of
Right.
Fighters 15. They don't like the strict requirements. Yeah. I am not a fighting game fan, so I don't have as much knowledge on that. I saw a little bit of footage of it. It kind of looked like you could do like some really crazy combo lines in it. So yeah, again, like I'm not a huge fan of the strict timing. That's been one of the things that and how button heavy a lot of fighting games where have been like the two big things that have stopped me from enjoying those games.
Yeah, because some fighting games have really just gone off the deep end, like
Hmm.
with how much the strict timing and the button complexity is insane.
Hmm. Now we haven't touched on first person shooter combat, but I think in of itself that could be
Completely
another
different.
hour. I think
Yeah.
that could be its own topic easily. The most he's jumping on Goombas. Mario May Cry. Someone invent that one.
Mario. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, like
Mario
Devil May.
Minecraft.
Ooh, Devil May Cry, specifically Devil May Cry 3. I find that one to be the most interesting of the Devil May Cries because that's one that they really gave you a lot of different abilities. And as another point again about the details, that a lot of the advanced stuff you can do in Devil May Cry is not required at all. Like if
At
you
all.
just want to you just want to use Rebellion and just slash everybody or Royal Guard, go for it. But like I've seen people like they had like that showmanship video that you can unlock that they show like what does triple S rank play look like in Devil May Cry. It's like oh my god. And the same thing
Right.
for Devil May Cry 5. Like if we're talking about fidelity as a quick shout out, having the song kind of correspond to the level of play, like they add like more instruments, it becomes more like ensemble as you go up in ranking. That is another like like chef's kiss in terms of like
Right.
a fidelity of like and rewarding the player for it.
Right. Audio is super important. Super,
Hmm.
super important. Like I said, just a quick topic on that on audio. Like I can forget most about a game, but I can remember like a good song that stuck out. I'll be humming it, right? So it always sticks out.
To Jantrovic. Well, this was supposed to be the general talk, and we still almost hit an hour and a half. So we still have a lot more combat we can talk about in future
Yeah, this
episodes.
is just general. I think he said already ended because the stream.
Ah,
Yeah.
and I'm still recording, so it will be at least fluid for them. Um, what else? Hmm. Ah, and yeah, it's definitely acting up. It got better at sometimes and it gets
It
worse
was
at
good.
others.
It was
Yeah.
good. We got quite a while in.
Let's see. Thoughts on Monster Hunter? Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, Monster Hunter is definitely like one like the more like oddities when it comes to combat because they designed every weapon as its own unique class.
Hmm.
I guess that's
Hmm.
another interesting point. What do you think about games that do that versus like what they do with Elden Ring is that every weapon has the same basic functionality. Right button for light attack, right trigger for heavy attack,
Hmm.
but the subtleties are in the animation. They're in how that weapon swings. Where with something like Monster Hunter, how you use the great sword is fundamentally different from how you use the crossbow and how you use the hunting horn and etc.
I think it's great. I think it's really good. It's not my cup of tea, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
to me, Monster Hunter is like a bit. Uh, the latest one was a bit more accessible, but in
Mm-hmm.
my mind, Monster Hunter is just a bit more hardcore in the way that I don't like to get. But I definitely think that's a great idea that we have to have it like definitely a way to do it like that is that it's almost a class or a skill, almost MMO kind of in a way,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that's a really good idea to do.
Mm-hmm. So here's a question. I'm not sure we can get an answer to it before we end the stream, but are there any examples of 3D action games, I should say, that really go above and beyond in terms of technical play. So this is not like the same level of fidelity as in a Dark Souls game, but I'm talking about one that really like gives you a whole lot. Kind of like, I guess to put another way, if you remember the game Skate, that was kind of like one of the more like advanced forms of skateboarding. Can you think of the Skate of 3D action games?
Wow, man, I got to get to work on it then.
There you go. There's your tagline. That you can. There's your bullet point.
There you go. The Skate of action games. No, I cannot, man. Can you?
Nah, like I seldom played Sifu. I've been hearing people
Sifu.
talk about that one.
Did you end up playing it or not?
No, I went with Elden Ring, but that is on the list as well. Because again, like it is very hard in terms of how much you want to really emphasize all these different layers. And what's going to be very fascinating to see with Elden Ring is what the churn rate is going to end up being. Now, again, with the game just being released like a week ago, we can't be looking at achievement rates and completion rates for any kind of meaningful data. But in like a year or two from now, it's going to be interesting to see where things shake up. Because right now there is certainly a lot of churn for those starting achievements. Like a lot of people did not beat a Margit or Murgit or whatever its name is. Let's see. Anything else about Monster Hunter? Like again, I really enjoy Monster Hunter, but it did get a little bit repetitive because it felt like there was only like once you figure out your weapon, there's only really one way you're going to use that weapon. Again, it gets back to what you're just saying in terms of like that MMO feel. That if you're a tank, you're going to be tanking and that's it. If you're the healer, you're not going to do like you're not going to be a healer fighter or mage tank, unless there is a mage tank class.
Could be a mage tank, but that's literally I think when I started playing it, I was like, oh, so this is like a single player MMO co-op Monster Hunter game. Okay.
Other than that, I guess, in case I didn't mention this earlier, again, the more options you give the player, they should be viable. And if you don't do that, then you run that risk of annoying people who rely on them. So again, like with Elden Ring, it does feel like you can play it a lot of different ways. And that's really good to see.
Yeah, and then on the other side, we don't want just one way to get to defeat an enemy or one way to progress through. You need multiple avenues to traverse it. So all those verbs, like you say, they need to be viable, and they all need to be viable to get to your objective, right? So if you have all those verbs should always be active at all times to allow you to achieve to what you want to get to, right?
Yeah, and it
shouldn't be like all of a sudden, like we were talking about, this verb, this is gone now out of your vocabulary. You forgot this verb, and it's like, why? So.
Yeah, if you do not want to, if you give the player 5 options, those 5 options should be possible no matter at what point in the game. And exactly. I think again, this goes to kind of how action games have evolved, and this could be a really good final point, at least for me, that the action genre has changed. I think really much fundamentally over the past 10 years, even maybe beyond that with Demon Souls. That while you can have like pure action games, you can have your Bayonettas, Devil May Cry, and so on. That is still, I think, a limited market, or quote unquote limited. That they can only be played one way. And if you can't play that one way, then the game's not for you. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it's going to be very interesting, again, like going back to Elden Ring, to see where it ends up sales-wise, especially compared to the other Souls-likes.
Right, like to Sekiro, or to see how it stands up. I think it's going to do really good, and I think it's going to have some lasting power. I just got a lot of like Breath of the Wild vibes from it, like of longevity when I was playing it. I felt that there was just so much richness in there to explore that I think it'll stick around for a bit. I mean, everyone has. I think Sekiro probably dropped off the fastest, maybe, out of all of them.
Maybe. As a point of comparison, Sekiro right now sits at 122,094 reviews on Steam. Elden Ring right now is at 156,172. So it's definitely doing the numbers. Now, again, how many of those people are going to see the game all the way through?
Right.
That's another story
That's
entirely.
another story. Definitely.
Kind of one. Like, it's again, like, that's when we start getting into kind of the challenges of personalization versus customization. Like, there are
Yeah.
people who have made some very weird looking characters in the Souls games. And, you can see, like, Kermit the Frog wielding the Berserker sword from Guts or from
Yeah.
Berserk, and, he just swings it like it's normal.
Yeah. I think that's good. I mean, like I've seen a lot of tweets of players being really happy that they could look like Kermit the Frog with the
Hmm.
Berserker. They really love the ability to just look like whatever they want to look like. So I think people like that ability.
Yeah, and personalization, of course, that is another huge topic in of itself. But
Hmm.
since we are coming up, or we've been going for almost an hour and a half, especially the internet issues, I think that's all I have to say for combat at the time. So, for you, Josh, do you have any final thoughts or any topics that we haven't touched on?
No, I think we basically covered everything so far. I'm just excited to see where the genre goes in the future. I hope to be a part of it, and so let's see where it goes in the future. That's about it, man.
Yeah,
And
and
we'll
again,
definitely got more to discuss on this in the future. This more,
yep,
way more
we'll
to
add it to
discuss.
the list of topics that
Yeah.
we have. But yeah, I think we'll wrap things up here. I will be probably playing Elden Ring on my third backup character on my own, but I'll be returning to the stream one for Monday. So, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in, whether you're enjoying this live with the lag or recorded without it. If you want to follow me, you'll find all my information over there in the corner, Patreon, Twitter, Discord, all that great stuff. And for you, Josh?
For me, the links will also be down in the description, but Twitter is where you find me, casual_scrub, working on the game Samurai Pig. So follow me there and see what's going on.
We'll be back next week around probably 4:35 for another episode of the Key to Games podcast, and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some there are in science of games. And until our next show, everybody, have a great rest of your weekend.
Great one. Thank you.